こんにちは、ハリケーンフットボールです。今回の教材はブライトンの三笘薫に関する動画です。ブライトンは FA カップでチェルシーと対戦し、2対1で勝利しました。今回の動画はZekko Footballのチャンネルから試合の分析動画をお届けします。三笘薫の決勝ゴールを含め、ブライトンがどのように試合を組み立て、ゴールを得たのか。そしてどのようにチェルシーの攻撃を封じたのかについて解説しています。三笘のゴールは個人の素晴らしいスキルがあったことも間違いないですが、そのプレーについても称賛しています。このような分析動画は常に個人的な見解ではあると思いますが、Zekko Footballはこの試合をどのように見たのか、チェックしてみましょう。
Brighton have knocked Chelsea out of the FA Cup after beating them by 2-1. And in this video, we're going to be taking a look at how they did it, including a breakdown of both Brighton goals and discussing why Chelsea only managed to get one shot on target in the entire 90 minutes. Simplicity is the word that I would use to best describe this Brighton display, and by that I mean the way that Brighton not only set up, but the way they went forwards and also defended. Fabian Herzl and Brighton recently were on the end of a 7-0 drumming to Nottingham Forest, in a game where Fabian Herzl played two strikers as essential attacking midfielders. This was a major issue because it left their midfield completely exposed, and it really caused the side to be completely imbalanced. Fast forward to now, and if you look at this side, it is completely different. Not only from the general setup, applying their 4-2-4, or what appeared to be a 4-2-4, it was the pairings throughout the pitch that I thought gave Brighton a whole heap of balance. Not only did you have the centre-back pairing, you also had the centre-midfield pairing, which was something completely different. Lamptey and Mitoma moving forwards as these left-side pairing. The right-side pairing of Veltman and Minter. And then you had Welbeck and Rutter. It was a really good balanced display, and it enabled for a number of different combinations that allowed Brighton to really move forwards and create quite interesting attacks. For example, Mitoma moving infield, allowing him to drift in and create overloads down this Brighton left-hand channel, the Chelsea right. Lamptey moving forwards and creating crosses into the box, allowing for this back three to essentially stay stationary with this midfield two, essentially creating 5 attackers and 5 defenders. Again, a balanced side. Then you're looking towards the other side. You're looking towards Minter. While he played a bit more of a defensive role than I'm sure he would have wanted to, he was able to recycle possession over to Veltman for a really crucial moment, allowing for Rutter to make his run into the box. Crucial and key passes from Rutter allowed for Brighton to then get on the front foot on a number of occasions, relying on the defensive stability and energy of Hinshelwood and Baleba. In short, I think Brighton went back to what really worked for them, and it was the pairings and the balance within this side that enabled them to get the upper hand. As for Chelsea, we'll talk about them a little bit later, but from a Brighton point of view, I thought they were pretty phenomenal and thoroughly deserved the victory. 12 minutes into the game and you had Brighton's first goal, and there are a couple of really interesting things to look at here. First of all, we have Lamptey on the left hand side and he's about to cross the ball into the box. But before we talk about that, I want to notice Jack Hinshelwood's run that was towards the byline. Now this dragged away both Caicedo and Gusto, and it enabled for Lamptey to then move into this space. It's this space that gives him the opportunity to then cross the ball into the box, and the moment the ball gets crossed into the box, you've got a number of chaotic problems. First of all, you've got essentially what is a 3v3 here in the centre of the pitch. Now the ball gets headed away by Chalobah, but it's then about the second phase of play, that next phase of play, that's extremely important, and this is where it falls down for Chelsea, but this is where Brighton brilliantly capitalise. Minter picks up the ball and recycles it pretty brilliantly, but notice the role of Jadon Sancho here. As a winger, yes, you need to double up with your left back to make sure that you can take the ball off of the opponent, but at the same time you also need to be aware of what's around you. Veltman is completely free and isolated, and notice how he's scanning the rest of the pitch as these Brighton players begin to reset for yet another phase of play. You've got Welbeck and you've got Rutter. As they come back into this position, you've got Veltman with an ability to cross, but you've also got Sancho who's almost ball watching a little bit. He's not necessarily sure whether to press and go or whether to hold this. Instead, he does almost neither, and I think this leads to a real major issue. Minter is able to recycle over to Veltman. He's ready, asking for the ball. Now, let's take a look at the centre of the box. You've got Chalobah, who's currently watching the play, and you've got Rutter. Now, Rutter is going to make a key move, just backing himself up a little bit. Chalobah gets caught ball watching somewhat, but then it's around these players. They need to make sure that they're able to mark these players as well. You've got Tosin Adarabioyo, who needs to be marking Welbeck, and all of a sudden, once this play happens, you've got a real good first-time cross from Veltman. Chalobah is too far away from Rutter, and that's where this main problem comes from. He doesn't scan behind him, he doesn't have a player telling him that he's not marking him, and it all starts to fall apart a little bit. But this first-time cross from Veltman is what makes this goal. It's extremely good, really high quality, and he whips it in with pace to the extent that Chalobah doesn't even jump. And then you're giving a load of free space to Rutter, who's able to leap onto it, head the ball towards the bottom left, and it goes past Sanchez before he even knows it. But a couple of things that really start to fall down there. You've got the Sancho mistake, you've got Chalobah ball watching, and you're not allowing that Chelsea backline to reset because of Brighton picking up that second phase of play so quickly. A couple of things that really make this goal happen. Simple, but brilliant. Now let's bring Chelsea into the mix. We're still going to be focusing on Brighton a little bit, especially with the way they defended so well, and we've got that second goal to look at. But from a Chelsea point of view, if I was a Chelsea fan, I'd be quite concerned. There are some really alarming things that happened in this game that I think could spell a couple of real problematic situations later down the line. First of all, we need to talk about Brighton. Brighton set up in their 4-4-2 defensive formation, and they made sure that they cut the lines between the midfielders and the defenders, meaning that there was no space in the centre between both lines. You've got Welbeck and Rutter who are able to move forwards to try and pressurise the ball to make sure that they're not able to be played through. But the crucial thing is the narrowness of the way that Brighton played, making sure that they were holding their line within the penalty area or in the same vein and line as the penalty area. This meant that Chelsea needed to go out wide. Now, a couple of really concerning things about this is that, number one, they didn't opt for an inverted fullback. Gusto did it on occasion, but they really opted to go out wide. Now, this is fine if you have a player that you can properly cross to, but Brighton were absolutely fine with Caicedo recycling the ball round to Neto, Neto either crossing into the box to no one, or to recycle it back to Gusto. Enzo Maresca has a real philosophy that he doesn't like overlapping fullbacks. He doesn't really like underlapping fullbacks either. He wants to make sure there's a 1v1 for both wingers to be able to do what they want. And then once they win that duel, if they win that duel, they're able to then get crosses into the box or be able to recycle possession out wide. The problem that you've got with this is the role of Christopher Nkunku. Now, Christopher Nkunku is not a number 9. I don't know who needs to hear that, and maybe Enzo Maresca does, but he's simply not. And having him in that forward line is essentially like just having another midfielder. He's not going to make those runs that you want a number 9 to make. He's not going to be darting across the penalty area, which means that the crosses you're going to be putting into the box, even though he might be somewhere near there, he's not going to have the aerial strength either to either get on a header or to be able to get on the end of a cross. It just doesn't necessarily make too much sense. And the fact that Enzo Maresca didn't change anything would be the most alarming thing. Cole Palmer and his role within this side, although he dropped and drifted and tried to find some space, the closeness of the lines between the Brighton defenders and the Brighton midfielders meant that there were no pockets of space to really be exploited. And that meant that Palmer needed to do the same thing as the rest of the Chelsea players, and that's recycle the ball out wide. In general, Chelsea failed to really create any kind of chance. I'm not counting the goal that they scored in the 4th minute, because that was Verbruggen throwing the ball into his own net. Chelsea need to have a look at themselves and find out and figure out a pattern of play that starts to break these sides down, because there seems to be a pattern unfolding with the way that you defend against Chelsea. You cut off the middle, you make sure that they have to force out wide, and once you do that, you rely on your tall, strong centre-backs or midfielders to win the ball against Chelsea's lacking in presence forwards. It seems like quite a sensible and quite an easy thing to do, and that's exactly what Brighton had. Chelsea had one shot on target in the entire match, and that was essentially just a shot from outside of the box from Cole Palmer. It's not good enough, and Chelsea need to try and fix that. And if Chelsea weren't going to bring any quality to the table in this game, Brighton certainly were, and that's exactly what happened for Brighton's second goal. This is absolutely brilliant. So you got Mitoma out on this left-hand side. Look at the position of Tariq Lamptey. Remember what we said about him drifting out on this left-hand side and then moving infield a little bit because of the positioning of Mitoma. Mitoma passes him the ball, and look how much space he's got. You've got so much time for him to be able to take a shot, and that's exactly what happens. He manages to receive the ball, take his shot, and try to make it go goal-bound. But it gets blocked. It gets blocked and then ricochets out towards a couple of players. It's a bit of a messy affair here, but the important thing to note is the positioning of Rutter, and as well as the positioning of the rest of these Brighton players. Look, they're all ready for that second phase of play, and again, it's the simplicity that's within this side that's enabled Brighton to be able to get onto the end of these situations. But once the ball comes out to Rutter, it's then about one piece and one moment of magic. Because once we take a look at this touch that he does right here is absolutely sensational. He chips it over the defence of Chelsea towards an on-running Mitoma. Look at how much space Mitoma has to work with. He's got acres, but this pass is what enables it to happen. You've got some Chelsea players ball watching, you've got some Chelsea players on the floor. I'm not saying it's their fault, but it's just the matter of fact. And the ball that gets chipped over by Rutter is absolutely phenomenal. Then comes this. This touch is unbelievable. Mitoma is just crazy for doing this, and he's able to take it under control and then chip Sanchez in pretty sensational fashion. But again, those two touches, that chip from Rutter, the touch from Mitoma, it's just absolutely wonderful, and it's the quality that was needed and it was severely lacking in this game, and Brighton managed to carve it out. And I think because of those moments and because of what they managed to do before, as well as their very good defensive display, they thoroughly deserved to win this game. He chips Sanchez in pretty spectacular fashion and gets his goal and gets his side through to the next round of the FA Cup. But of course, guys, let me know what you think in the comment section below on both Brighton and Chelsea. What did you make of the game, and what do you make of both sides? Let me know your thoughts. I would love to hear from you. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something new, and I hope to see you in the next one. But until then, my friends, take care.
次は解説です。このような分析動画では、会話的なカジュアルな表現はあまり使われません。一方で、少しナレーション的な、テキスト的な表現をベースに使われるため、今回の解説では、サッカーで使う用語も入っていますが、トイックによく出るような基本的な簡単なボキャブラリーも多く解説しています。皆さんはどれだけカバーしているでしょうか？それでは本日の解説をチェックしてみましょ
う。On the end of a 7-0 drumming to Nottingham Forest.
ドラミングは、もともとドラムを叩くこと、連続した打撃音を意味しますが、スポーツの文脈では大敗や圧倒的な敗北を指すことがあります。これはドラムのように相手を叩きのめすイメージから来ています。
On the end of a 7-0 drumming to Nottingham Forest. On the end of a 7-0 drumming to Nottingham Forest. In order to essentially stay stationary with this midfield too.
ステーショナリーは何かが動かない状態を指す形容詞です。似た単語にスタティック、静的な、フィクト、固定された、などがあります。文房具のステーショナリーとスペルと発音が似ているので注意しましょう。
To essentially stay stationary with this midfield two. To essentially stay stationary with this midfield two that enable them to get the upper hand.
Get the upper hand は競争や対立する状況で相手より有利な立場を得ることを意味するイディオムズ。上の手を取るというイメージから支配する、主導権を握るというニュアンスになります。
That enable them to get the upper hand. That enable them to get the upper hand. But this first time cross from Veltman is what makes this goal.
ファーストタイムは初めての一発での最初のという意味ですが、サッカーにおいてはボールをトラップせずにダイレクトでプレーすることを指し、相手ディフェンスが整う前に素早く攻撃を仕掛けるための技術を表します。ファーストタイムショット、ファーストタイムパス、ファーストタイムクロスという表現でダイレクトにワンタッチでプレーすることを表します。
But this first time cross from Veltman is what makes this goal. But this first time cross from Veltman is what makes this goal. And he whips it in with pace to the extent that
ホイップは素早い動きを表す動詞として広く使われ、主に何かを勢いよく動かす、急激な動きをするという意味を持ち、スポーツの解説や料理、日常会話でも頻繁に使われます。スポーツの文脈では、ボールを素早く蹴る、 パスを強く送るといった意味になり、テニスや野球では腕をしならせて素早くスイングする意味でも使われることがあります。一方、料理では泡立てるという意味になり、ホイップクリームというフレーズで生クリームを泡立てるという意味になりますが、名詞でホイップクリームという場合は、ホイップドクリームと過去分詞形で形容詞として使われます。to the extent that は、ある出来事の影響の大きさや範囲を表すフレーズです。ビジネス英語やアカデミックな文脈で頻繁に使われ、なんなんするほど、なんなんの範囲でといった意味を持ち、制限を示す意味でも使えます。
And he whips it in with pace to the extent and he whips it in with pace to the extent and he whips it in with pace to the extent that Tarute, who's able to leap onto it.
リープは大きく飛ぶ、飛び越えるという意味を持つ単語で、スポーツや日常の動作、比喩表現としてもよく使われます。スポーツでは、選手がボールに向かってジャンプする、ゴールキーパーがシュートを防ぐために飛び込むといったシチュエーションで使われることが多いです。また、急激な変化や成長を表す比喩的な意味でも使われ、ビジネスやキャリアの話でも使われます。
Who's able to leap onto it. Tarute, who's able to leap onto it. If I was a Chelsea fan, I'd be quite concerned.
コンサーンドは、心配している、気にしている、関係しているという意味を持つ形容詞で文脈によってニュアンスが異なります。人や状況について不安を感じているときに使われたり、特定の話題や出来事に対して関心がある場合、さらに、特定の人や物事が、ある問題や状況に関係していることを表す場合などに使われます。
If I was a Chelsea fan, I'd be quite concerned. If I was a Chelsea fan, I'd be quite concerned. I think could spell a couple of real problematic situations.
スペルは文脈によって大きく意味が変わる単語ぜ。最も基本的な意味は単語を綴るですが、悪い結果を招くという意味のスペルディザスター、スペルトラブルという表現もビジネスやニュースでよく使われます。また、スペルには短期間や呪文や魔法という意味もあり、ファンタジー作品では呪文として登場することが多いぜ。
I think could spell a couple of real problematic situations. I think could spell a couple of real problematic situations. They who are able to move forwards to try and pressurize the ball.
プレッシャライズは物理的心理的な圧力をかけるという意味を持つ動詞で、スポーツの文脈では相手にプレッシャーをかける、ボールを奪うために積極的にプレスをかけるという意味でよく使われます。また、精神的社会的な圧力をかけるという意味でも使われ、強要された状況を表すことができ、技術科学の分野では加圧する、気圧を調整するという意味で使われます。
Who are able to move forwards to try and pressurize the ball. Who are able to move forwards to try and pressurize the ball. Or in the same vein and line as the penalty area.
ベインは主に医学、自然科学、比喩表現の3つの分野で使われます。医学、生物学では血液を心臓に戻す静脈の意味で使われ、自然地質学では葉の葉脈、鉱石の鉱脈を指します。比喩的な使い方では特定の傾向、特徴、雰囲気を表し、同じような傾向で、同じ流れでというような文脈で、ビジネスやアカデミックな文脈でよく使われます。
Or in the same vein and line as the penalty area. Or in the same vein and line as the penalty area. Is that, number one, they didn't opt for an inverted fullback.
インバーティッドは通常の向きとは逆になっている。上下左右が反転していることを表す形容詞で、様々な分野で使われ、スポーツ、数学、日常生活など幅広い場面で登場します。サッカーではサイドバックがサイドではなく反転して内側にポジションを取るという意味でインバーティッドフルバックと呼ばれ、数学、科学、工学では数式や構造、デザインなどが反転していることを表現します。
Is that number one, they didn't opt for an inverted fullback. Is that number one, they didn't opt for an inverted fullback. It isn't really like underlapping fullbacks either.
アンダーラップは主にサッカーの戦術用語で使われる単語で、サイドの選手の内側を駆け上がる動きを指します。通常のオーバーラップは、サイドバックやミッドフィールダーがウィングの外側を駆け上がる動きですが、アンダーラップはウィングやサイドハーフの内側を走り込み、中央寄りから攻撃を仕掛ける動きを指し、相手ディフェンスラインを崩し、より効果的なパスコースを作るために用いられます。
It doesn't really like underlapping fullbacks either. He's not going to be darting across the penalty area.
ダートアクロスは矢のように素早く横切る、走り抜けるという意味を持つフレーズで。ダートには矢のように素早く動くというニュアンスがあり、特に人や動物、車などが瞬時に移動するシーンでよく使われます。サッカーの解説では、ペナルティエリアを素早く横切ったというように攻撃的な動きの描写に使われます。
He's not going to be darting across the penalty area. Meant that there were no pockets of space to really be exploited.
エキスプロイトは何かを最大限に活用する。有利に使うというポジティブな意味と不当に利用する。搾取するというネガティブな意味の両方を持つ単語で。サッカーではエキスプロイトザスペースを有効活用するという表現がよく使われ、相手の守備の隙をついて攻撃することを意味し、ビジネスでは新しい市場機会を活用するというような時に使われます。ネガティブな意味では人や資源を不当に利用するという意味で使われ、労働者を搾取する、天然資源を乱用するなどの表現で使われます。
meant that there were no pockets of space to really be exploited. And because there seems to be a pattern unfolding.
アンフォールドは折りたたまれていたものを広げる。出来事が展開する。明らかになるという意味を持つ動詞で。物理的に広げるという意味では折りたたまれたものを広げるときに使われる一方で、物理的な動きだけでなく出来事が展開する。進行するという意味で使われる場合は、物事や状況やストーリーが徐々に明らかになる。進んでいくというニュアンスで使われます。
Because there seems to be a pattern unfolding. And try to make it go goal-bound. But it gets blocked.
バウンドは何々へ向かう。何々に制約される。何々する運命のという意味を持つ設備詞で、名詞や形容詞につけて特定の方向や状態を示します。物理的な移動を示す場合と、比喩的に何かに縛られた状態を示す場合の2つの主要な用法があり、さらに未来の出来事が確実に起こることを表すときにも使われます。
And try to make it go goal-bound, but it gets blocked. He's got acres.
エーカーは主に面積を表す単語で、特にアメリカやイギリスなどの土地の測定単位として使われます。また、エーカーズオブという表現は、広大な〇〇、大量の〇〇という比喩的な意味でも使われます。
He's got acres. And Brighton managed to carve it out.
カーブアウトは、時間、機会、キャリアなどを努力して獲得する。特定の役割や地位を築くという意味を持つフレーズで。もともとは木や石を掘るという意味から派生し、時間やチャンスを掘り出すように手に入れるというニュアンスがあります。
And Brighton managed to carve it out.
いかがでしたか？三笘薫のゴールは、ルターの素晴らしい浮き球のパスと、三笘の素晴らしいトラップからのチップキックでのゴールであったため、個人的なスキルが光ったゴールだったと思います。それでも、チームとしてどのように戦おうとしているのかを知ることが、ゲームを見る上でより楽しめるものだと思いますので、こういう分析動画を見るのはいつも興味深いですし、このようなものを見るたびにスペースを使うプレー、スペースを作るアクションが重要で、裏を狙うランニングや縦パスを入れてレイオフし前進するプレー、サイドチェンジやロングパス、遠目からのミドルシュート、三笘のようなゴールラインまで切り込んでいくドリブルが、非常に重要なプレーであることを少しずつ学んでいます。そういう展開を作れば、チェルシーもどこかでミスをするチームなのでしょうから。次戦のチェルシー戦もそういうプレーでゴールを決めてほしいなと思います。本日もご視聴いただきありがとうございました。またすぐにお会いしましょう。